Hello and welcome to this edition of A Conversation With. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and in studio today, a return visit. We haven't talked to him in a while, Carl Alves, the Executive Director of PAACA, as it's known as, but the official title is People Acting in Community.
Almost.
Oh, excuse me. Positive, I messed that up. Positive Addiction Against Chemical Addiction.
Let me help with this. That's why we call it PAACA.
Yeah.
It's Positive Action Against Chemical Addiction.
That's what I had, yeah.
Yeah.
I messed up the
Yes,
addiction.
there we go. It's all good. So, and it is, and our close friends, PACE,
exactly.
People Acting in Community Endeavors,
yeah.
we all get those meshed together.
PAACA's you've been around for doing this forever.
A long time.
The
organization's actually been around since 1983.
Really?
Yeah. And 1983.
Same building though?
No.
No, okay.
Started it where the new police station is, in that church, actually, in the little rectory building, the basement of that rectory, and wanted to create a place where people could kind of come and for 12-step meetings, but also for support and that sort of thing. And grassroots, it remains grassroots to this day. Moved to space up on Acushnet Avenue, a storefront there. It was short-lived, moved downtown to a space, but then Agnes Braz and Hope S. Bean had on board at the old Clifford School, which is 360 Coggeshall Street, and in 1987, that's where we moved.
But
I've been there since 1991.
But it's expanded as well.
Oh.
I mean, the programs that you offer in general, and before we get into the main topic, tell us a little too about what it is that PAACA does. Obviously, it does the abuse that we're going to talk about, but it's so much more.
Yeah, it is. It's a place where people can get the help that they need. We're not necessarily a counseling agency, but we can help you find counseling, or we can help you get inpatient treatment or medically assisted treatment. But there's a lot of other kinds of wraparound, because a lot of times people that are struggling with addiction on this road to recovery need a lot of things. It might be housing, it might be food, it might be clothing, it might be, support systems, a job, those kinds of things. And so that's how we've grown over the years, is driven by what our consumers are asking for. And as I mentioned, we are a consumer-driven organization. We operate with a lot of volunteers. And so that's how we've grown over the years.
But your safety net has just expanded so much. I mean, you look at not the organizations, but the boards that you belong to. When it comes to the homeless population, you're on it. I know when it comes to when we were talking about the food drives in the winter, you're on those.
Right.
I mean, it's.
People say, well, what does PAACA have to do with it? Well, everybody that comes to us has to eat.
Right.
And they're all looking for a safe place to stay, and they're all looking for purpose in their life. And that's really the core of our mission, is helping people find purpose in life.
And you've talked about this before, but I think it's good to reiterate the success that the organization has when you see the people that you've helped and how they've transformed their lives is the payoff.
It is. And sometimes we forget because we're seeing the crisis right in front of us. But literally thousands and thousands of people have gone through and found their recovery and moved on to productive lives.
And they help, and they come back.
Absolutely.
You've talked about that.
That's the core. I mean, one person helping another, and we thrive and rely on volunteers trying to, help us advance these things.
And when you think back to when you started, is that the gratifying thing when you see how the program has grown and the successes? That's got to be the thing that drives the board, you.
I think the successes are great, but there is so much need out there.
Yeah.
And it's becoming so complex and really difficult that I don't think we take a lot of time to kind of celebrate the successes, even though they're there, because we're constantly trying to, this thing's falling off the table, let's try to lift that up, and unfortunately it feels like a whack-a-mole. What are we going after next? And so it is challenging, but it is fulfilling because I can work side by side with some really talented people that have wonderful lived experience that are there to give. I mean, the beauty of working at PAACA is you don't have to be perfect to be there.
Yeah.
We encourage people that are imperfect to come in and join us, and then we'll find our way together.
But I think the one thing you said that's good is it's complicated. Yeah. It's a lot different than it was in 1983, sure. 1991, and I can't even imagine. I mean, just technology and all the other things. It's not as simple as it was 25 years ago.
And just when you think you're getting it, then the pandemic pops up. I mean, and that is threw a whole new spin on isolation and addiction and all of those kinds of things. So I mean, we're constantly pivoting. We're constantly looking to, as you had mentioned, we're involved in a lot of, or developing or have coordinated various coalitions because no one group can do everything.
And that's the one thing doing this show and other shows is really how the different agencies work together. Everybody's got their sort of niche.
Right.
But the organization can't be successful. Like we've been here in PACE. I've had PACE in here. Sure. I've had the United Way in here.
Yeah.
And they all talk about we can't be successful if you're not successful. It really is tied together.
It really is because I mean there's so many different kinds of needs, but there's also so much talent and resource out there. How do we channel it so that it can be as effective as possible? And how can we lift folks up out of the despair of addiction or poverty or mental health challenges, because that's part of our community. We're only going to be as great as we are for the least of our brothers.
Right. And I told you off camera, but the reason I wanted to talk to you is because I was watching one of the news programs on Sunday morning, right at the turn of the year, start of the year, and we were going to do this show until I had COVID. But they were saying that one of the most underreported stories this past year and going into this year was the fentanyl situation. Nationwide, obviously.
Right.
It was a nationwide show. And that they felt it was underreported and that the situation is still very troubling. And I just thought that was interesting that you think there's coverage, but COVID had dominated so much that it's kind of like the homeless situation, everything else, everything's been exacerbated, as you mentioned, by COVID, and now it's in the forefront.
It is, and the challenging thing is the fentanyl trade has really consumed opiates. So there's really not a heroin problem now. It's all pretty much fentanyl, and that's because it can be made in a lab. There are no growing seasons, those kinds of things. One of the biggest, think about it. Fentanyl really came onto the scene. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but illicit fentanyl really came on the scene in about 2012, 2013. And, just when we thought, we were addressing the prescription drug crisis, and we started to begin to see some leveling off, the reduction in prescribing of these kinds of drugs and the misuse within the conventional setting, that's when fentanyl really is taken up, and it's just had a trajectory that's significant.
For people who don't know, what is fentanyl?
Fentanyl is an opioid analgesic, and so it is a tremendous painkiller. And that is why it is prescribed, because there is a pharmaceutical grade fentanyl, and it's usually for end-of-life kinds of pain management. It is not meant to, and has never been designed to help with chronic back pain, although it's been prescribed that way, and that's how people got hooked, because it is an opiate. It's an opiate just like heroin. So, it's 10 times, 100 times the power of opiate.
Yeah, that's one of the stats that I got. I'm curious as to, so when you get a Percocet or Vicodin or something like that, is that fentanyl? Is that like fentanyl?
It's not fentanyl. It's a lesser. It's a lesser potency than fentanyl. Depending, these drugs are combined with other types of drugs to kind of reduce inflammation, or specifically. But the principle is the same. It blocks pain receptors, and when it blocks pain receptors, think of it as a golf tee, and the molecule of an opiate, whether it's a Percocet or fentanyl or heroin, is here. And the longer it stays on that neural transmitter, the less pain happens. But also what happens is your breathing slows down, your heart rate slows down, and if you have too much of it on too many sensors, that's what creates overdose. So if you're taking too much of a substance, or that sort of, it just slows down your respiratory and your bodily functions, and then people just expire, but you're not feeling pain. And a lot of people are struggling with pain, whether it's physical pain, emotional pain, that sort of thing. And that's why sometimes people misuse it. The longer you use these drugs, the more of the drug you need in order to feel normally or have the same effect.
This is, I guess, more of opinion for you, or could be fact too, but I'm curious because when I was reading too, do you feel as though the problem with fentanyl is because people were prescribed it and they got addicted to it, or was it just because people, it's like any other drug, I can get it and what have you, and
I mean, it goes back to the 90s when these drugs were actually marketed as the magic drug that removes pain and weren't addictive. We found out that not to be true, and we know that the manufacturers knew that at the time as well. Yeah. That's why we're getting billions of dollars of settlements, which is also changing the way we do stuff. We'll get to that, I guess. Yeah. But so over time, doctors were graded on their ability to manage pain. And so they were prescribing this miracle drug, and then we saw increases the amount of dependency on that. And that's why, we are in the situation that we are. And that's because people using it as prescribed would become dependent, and then constant ongoing use led to addiction. And then, for some people, they were able to pull away from it. For others, it didn't. And that's where it got its start. Today, it's different.
Right.
Because it's not as readily available. Prescribers are being very proactive when they give these painkillers, because it's still in use, and we want it to be used for the proper. But people need to understand the consequences.
Well, one of the things that I read, there were a couple of examples of people who need it and they can't get it because the doctors will not prescribe it to them. And there are doctors who say, I guess they're whatever they're being treated for, it's like, yes, you can have this, but the pharmacist or whatever is like, I'm not doing it.
Right.
So it's almost gone the other way in that doctors don't want to do it now.
Right. And I think we're looking for alternative aspects. I mean, the doctors aren't doing it because they know they're being watched by the Drug Enforcement Agency.
Exactly. Yeah.
So every doctor that prescribes this is on a data registry. And so, if there's folks that have high levels of prescription, they're being watched. Because there were some unscrupulous docs that were doing it and selling it, and and that's unfortunate as well.
Is it harder to deal? I mean, that's probably not the right way to put it, but I'm thinking back in 1991 or 92 or 93 when I first met you. You're dealing with this, and you're dealing with the medications then, or not the medications, but the drugs then, the heroin, cocaine. Yeah. Is it harder to deal with the fentanyl than it is with those type of drugs?
It's a different, there is a physical addiction that comes with opiate misuse or dependence. I call dependence long-term use of it. And some folks are using it to manage their back pain.
Yeah.
And it's, but the consequences are the same. You've become dependent, so your body needs it. When you don't have it, you feel flu-like symptoms, all of those kinds of things, and it's a miserable existence. And that is, that's withdrawal. So detox helps with withdrawal, but opioid analgesics have been used for 100 years plus. Methadone was created by the Germans, and that's an opiate too. And so there are replacement therapies or medically assisted treatment that is done in a controlled setting that helps people get off those drugs.
So from your standpoint, what do you see? Are people going into PAACA because they know they have an issue, or are you dealing with folks that don't know they have a problem and you're trying to help them? What are you seeing?
Most. I think we see people that are really struggling. They're either getting pressure from criminal justice system, or their families, or their own desire to kind of live a different life, and we'll help them with that. But there are no easy answers with any of this. We're also seeing a lot of folks that consequences of ongoing use, because it's expensive, the social determinants of health, things like food,
Yeah.
shelter,
Shelter,
that
yeah.
kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
that's why we're kind of do a lot of the food and shelter stuff, because there's a lot of people that are impacted. There are families, the child that is growing up in a family with addiction, is having a negative impact. We want to raise that young person up to help them build some coping skills, because we know that young person that has been experienced and traumatized by the experience of somebody going to jail from their family, or the transients because they can't hold an apartment, is difficult. And so we want to try to help the family lifetime, whether they're elders or children and everything in between. Whoever's ready and needs some help, we want to match that. And so we want to have those resources.
How readily accessible is it in the city, in the local community here?
The treatment or the drugs?
The drugs.
The drugs, yeah. It is very accessible. It's very accessible.
And you see,
and it's not just our community. I mean, it's national.
That's why I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah.
And you see, like I look back, and there was a couple of drug busts by the New Bedford Police with
Sure.
tremendous amounts of fentanyl seized and cash and what have you.
Yeah.
And that's, from what you're looking at, that's just a dent.
It's a dent. Now that it's fentanyl and not just the regular grown poppy opiate, heroin. The profit margin is so much more on the streets, which is driving some of this traffic. One of the new phenomenon that really concerns me is that there are counterfeit pills being created by the cartels. And so folks that think maybe they're getting a Percocet are getting fentanyl. It's in a pill. It looks like a regular Percocet.
Yep.
They market and everything else like that, but it's not. It's fentanyl, and we're seeing street drugs where the person's selling fentanyl, but they're also selling marijuana, and we're seeing more psychosis with the marijuana because it's crossover, because these are not pristine pharma level labs. They're doing this at somebody's table somewhere, and so there's a lot of crossover. The other emerging trend too is stimulants, because historically, for a long period of time, opiates would rise in use, and then they would dissipate, and then stimulants like cocaine would rise, and it used to be kind of a wavy line in terms of ebb and flow in terms of demand. But now there's just straight demand on that, and we're seeing pill form of meth, which is very concerning. We've seen over the last few years various labs blowing up in Taunton and other places, and those are telltale signs of meth manufacturing, which is a big challenge, and it's something that we are not, we're getting there, but we're not where we need to be in terms of being able to offer treatment for meth.
The one thing I think that should be pointed out too, and you kind of alluded to it, this is, the fentanyl abuse is all encompassing in that it's all people. It's all financial class or race, creed, whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're in a suburb, a little town, or a city. This is everywhere. And it's not discriminating.
No, not at all. And the good thing is we've got a lot of great organizations working together. We have an opioid task force, so that everybody that has experienced an overdose will get a visit, as long as their houses aren't under investigation, that kind of stuff. But the majority of folks will get a visit from an outreach team from New Bedford to kind of offer support, help, guidance, Narcan, these kinds of things, talk with families and support. So we're trying to be proactive, something that we established a number of years ago, and it's really kind of blossomed. Police department has kind of take that on, which has been a really good, positive way to kind of address it up front.
Well, you have a great relationship, I know, with obviously the New Bedford Police Department and the local, the local departments, and they're stretched thin too because they're dealing with other stuff. But what are some of the things that you and the chiefs talk about is to sort of deal with the issue?
Well, I think it is about education and training of staff. The forces that are, we've done work with police as well as fire and EMS, EMS sees it the most.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
You know, and it is a challenge. And you know, one of the biggest things that I think that we need to look at is self-care for the care providers, because people that roll up on this constantly are impacted for it, and we need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on their mental health and their spirit, because it can catch up. You know, it's
mentally,
secondary trauma.
It's got to weigh on you on a daily basis when you're seeing it every day.
Right. I mean, we're seeing violence, and I'm not suggesting our force, but I mean across the country, and it's horrific. We just saw it recently at in Memphis, and you know, I'm looking and saying, how are we taking care of our police department that becomes that rage is manifested in that way? Because people don't start off, that way. Right. It's because I think a lot of times we don't pay attention to it. We just think our finest and our bravest just go out there and they're just machines. But I mean, we need to care for one another, the caregivers.
How much did COVID exacerbate the problem?
Well, I mean, we're still kind of reeling from that. There was the interesting dynamics. So we stayed open throughout, but we were doing things remotely and, trying to do the supportive kinds of things. But people isolated. And I think a lot of people passed as a result of that. But it paled against the numbers of COVID. And I do think that some of the folks in COVID also, it's tough to kind of determine what took them first. But we've definitely seen that. The social networks have broken. But that's beginning to come together. If you take a look at 12-step meeting participation, that is really getting strong and stronger every day, which is good, because I think we need all hands on deck. The state has more money because of these settlements, so there's new opportunities.
And talk about those too, the settlements, because I just want to briefly touch on them too, is that these pharma companies have had to settle with states, because each state has sued, and so I know Massachusetts, and I don't know what the exact total is, but because they've had different settlement amounts.
Sure.
Is that money being distributed fairly, and really, is it helping?
Well, I mean, like any bureaucracy, it takes a while. Exciting part is that we are coming together as communities, as a region, actually, which is very exciting, because I think we need to look at this as a regional issue, not just a New Bedford or Dartmouth.
It's a greater New Bedford issue.
It's even bigger than that. Right. It's more closer to a Bristol County issue. Yeah. And looking at strategies and approaches that we could do collectively. So we're actually in the process, the New Bedford Health Department is convening groups, and we're doing some focus groups and some strategic planning about how is this money best spent. What are our unmet needs? What can we do to kind of improve things? We're looking at both prevention, intervention, treatment, and recovery. And there is a lot of money, but money isn't going to solve the problem. Although it is a good tool to build collaboration, and that helps. So I'm hopeful.
I mean, like with any addiction, first and foremost, the person's going to want to be helped.
That's right.
And I know that's probably, and my dad worked in that field too. And the biggest issue is that's the biggest hurdle to climb. Is you can have all the resources you want, but if that person doesn't want the help, you're just running into a wall. I mean, you're trying every day, but
that's the job, though, is to be here when that person's ready. And it might be here, and here, but that's the consistency that is important,
right?
And because you never know when it will.
When you
I've had friends gone 18 times to treatment. It was that 18th time that it made a big difference. I've had know people that have been away from drugs and living a life of recovery for 10 years, but then slipped into active addiction and are back on the street. So I mean, it is a very perilous journey. But there's a lot of hope, and the more community supports that we have, the stronger our recovery will be. I look forward to the day where it's not just a recovery community, but a community of recovery. And as we do more and more mainstreaming of these positive events in places where people can feel safe and drug-free areas, that kind of stuff, the closer we will be to that.
We got a couple minutes left. I want to give you an opportunity. I know you've got some events coming up that you want to talk about too,
yes.
that people can attend and learn about the things that you guys are doing.
Absolutely. I think, there's one of the things, homelessness is one of the big issues that impacts us all. And that's why we've been so active in trying to mobilize community to work with existing groups and really develop a plan for the future. We have an excellent relationship with Representative Keating's office. They're going to be hosting an event on April 12th that will bring in folks from HUD. It's going to be at UMass. More information will be coming available. Real conversations about how do we create more housing. Too many people are, and I'm not just talking about the drug-addicted population. I'm talking about elders. I'm talking about
middle class.
Middle class and everything. How are our kids going to afford to live here? When rents are $1,700 a month. I mean, yes, compared to Boston, it's less, but the numbers aren't working. And so I really do think that we need to be innovative in our approaches. So there's that in April. Those that are struggling with mental health, schools have been a really strong partner with this. And on March 1st, we are doing a Peace of Mind Forum. It'll be at Keith Middle School. And we're going to have an afternoon thing for professionals with CEUs, and then we're going to have an evening thing. Because unfortunately, one of the consequences is self-destructive behavior. We're seeing rises in the number of suicides and the mental health conditions. That is one of the negative outcomes of COVID, and that isolation. So we're trying to do what we can to have some of these events and other things, but we'll share that information as we get it, and you'll get the word out.
People, if they have questions, concerns, whatever, how can they get in touch with?
Well, our website is PAACA.org. We keep a lot there. We're on Facebook and Instagram. There's a lot of different groups. Feel free to send us an email or give us a call. We'll get you on the list so that you can know what's coming on in real time. And get involved. Everybody can do something because everybody can serve.
Yeah. No, and it's true. And the website, by the way, I mean, I've been on it. There's a lot of information.
A lot of stuff. Yeah.
So it's a great tool.
Yeah.
And if you don't have it, like you said, call.
Yeah, call. But do something. Be part of the solution. Don't sit in isolation. I mean, whether it's families that are struggling with addiction of a loved one, or somebody in active addiction that doesn't know what to do, we could talk. No pressure. Try not to be judgmental. And there are options. And maybe you're not ready, but we at least know what's out there.
Yeah, it's good seeing you. It's always good seeing you.
Yeah, always.
All right, Carl. Thank you. Carl Alves, our guest from PAACA. My thanks to him. And again, contact PAACA on the website if you have any questions. And my thanks to you for watching. That's going to do it for this edition of A Conversation With. I'm Jim Marshall. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you again soon.